speak from here. My name is Victoria D'Angelo. I'm the Assistant Administrator for the city's Community Redevelopment Agency. And I'd like to welcome everyone here to the Urban Design Guidelines Pre-Charrette Lunch and Learn. We have an agenda here with, we'll be doing an introduction, and once we do that, we'll be turning over to our consultants with DPZ, and they'll be providing some information on what urban design guidelines are, and giving you a little bit information about our upcoming charrette. Once they complete their presentation, we'll move on to a question and answer session. If you signed in the back, you may have seen the speaker cards. We're going to ask that everyone who would like to speak fill out a speaker card and hand it to staff. We'll introduce you, and then once we do, you can walk up to the podium and present your question or comment. With that, I'm going to turn over to Ms. Helen Gibson. She's the CRA Administrator.
Good afternoon, everyone, and we are so glad that you are here. We apologize, we had to shift the schedule a little bit, but we're actually here and getting this going, and we're so glad that you took out the time to come and join us. Before I go into my further introductory remarks, I do have a statement from our city attorney that I would like to read to you all. Please be aware that as an elected or appointed member of a city board or city council, you are under an obligation to refrain from making any comments regarding your position on any issues that you are likely to have to vote on in the future. So if you're a member of a board appointed by council, or if you're a member of council, this is a sunshine meeting. This is a sunshine meeting. Please be aware. So you really need to refrain. You'll have to be in listen mode because it's something that would have to come before you for action. So if you're East Side Board, West Side Board, Planning Board, CRA, please remember that the law requires you to refrain. Thank you. And so I'd just like to give a little bit of a background as to why we are here. We're trying to get your input to prepare urban design guideline overlays for the CRA neighborhoods. The CRA is a very large district. It extends basically from the city limit on the west to 17th Avenue on the east from the waterfront, and then it more or less jogs up and down the city limit line. Some places it ends at Cervantes Street. Some of the CRA neighborhoods have are protected under the Land Development Code, and some are not. Historically, development has come into the neighborhoods that don't have any kind of a guideline or protection over them. Some of it has been good, some of it has not been good. We've heard from a lot of you over the years of concern about some of the things that have been going into your district. Of late, I think with the boom, a lot of the CRA neighborhoods are now of interest to development, and I think we're seeing a lot of activity. So what we're trying to propose are some kind of guidelines that will be, I'll call them light, as the consultant has used that term. In other words, they will not be restrictive. It will not be like a historic district regulation, but they will provide some predictability on what might go into the area. And that will be a benefit both to the residents and the property owners that have been there historically, and to developers that want to come in and build, so that everybody kind of knows what the playing field is. So with that, I think that's all my comments.
Just want to add that we do have people on through webinar as well. So I just want to make one comment, too, that I forgot to mention, is that we do have attendance through webinar. And when we get to the question and answer, we'll take the in-person comments first, and then after that, we will proceed with the people that are on webinar. For the people that are on webinar, please just type in your name if you'd like to speak, and we'll take you on a first-come, first-served type of basis.
With that, we'd like to turn over to our consultants, DPZ Co-Design.
Thank you, Helen and Victoria. Before I begin, I'm curious to know how many people are in the room.
We didn't do a count.
Generally speaking. Or maybe you can tell us later. That's fine. If you have a sense of it. I hope the room is packed.
Probably 20 or so.
About 25 right now.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for coming to this Lunch and Learn. I mean, I would like to say that the lunch is for you and the learn is from us, because we're beginning this process by which we're going to come and help make some proposals to you about how you can protect the character of your neighborhoods more so than it has traditionally happened. So I want to make maybe about a 10 to 15 minute presentation just to frame the discussion in terms of what we're doing, what we've been hired to do, what we're going to be doing, and then really spend some time on what the charrette of this intensive planning workshop we've organized for next week is going to be, so that we can really encourage you all to come and participate with us in a very interactive manner. So having said that, today's presentation is going to be focused on these four topics. Very quickly, confirming what the study area is. There are 3 CRA areas we're going to be looking at, and the goals of the CRA. As Victoria or Helen indicated, we want to be very clear and reassure people that what we're doing is not rethinking or rewriting the zoning code in any way, but actually proposing. We want to propose some urban design guidelines to help you develop, or help the communities develop in a way that is more in keeping with the character of your communities. Show you the project timeline, and then talk about the charrette. While the charrette is the most public component of what we're doing, because we're going to be there for 5 days, it is by no means the end of the public process. It's really after the charrette that your public process, as you typically know it, begins. Anyways, so having said that, just very briefly, I thought I'd introduce DPZ. My name is Marina Corey, and I'll be the project director on this project. You will be seeing myself and Mike and Greg and Laura at the charrette. We're from the DC office, the DC area office, and we are planners and architects. And Laura is she's going to be our greeter and our charrette coordinator and our helper in all sorts of ways. And then we have Elaine Mills from our Miami office, who's going to join us and going to be focused specifically on landscaping standards, whereas we are going to be thinking more about the built form and drawing. We also have Rick Hall, who's going to be joining our charrette. He is a transportation engineer, and he really helps communities figure out how not to focus exclusively on you moving cars from point A to B, but how to make communities more walkable, more bikeable, more contextual. And that's not to say that every street has to be walkable and bikeable, but in most of your areas, that is the case. The challenge is on the state DOT streets, but we'll be spending a lot of time talking about what we want those streets to look like. And he will help in that regard. And last but certainly not least, we have a consultant called Max Zabala, who's really there to help illustrate the results of what zoning gives. Now, zoning is a very technical, boring term for most people. Unless you're embedded in it on a daily basis, most people don't quite really understand. They know they have a property and that certain things can happen on that property, but understanding all the regulations that affect that property, the height, how big the building can be, what the distance it needs to be from its other uses is important. And your zoning code is actually sets up a whole series of rules that we call as of right development, which is this is what you currently can do on your property and this is what you can't. What Max does incredibly effectively in real time is he helps us draw up what can currently be done. And what we want to do is encourage the community to come in and help us, tell us what it is you want to see, and we're going to draw that up and see how it's possible to get there. Maybe what people want to see is already somewhere in your zoning code. Maybe it isn't, and if it isn't, that's what the purpose of the Urban Design Guidelines are supposed to be, is to help illustrate how you can get to that point. And so, one thing about our charrettes are that most people think of charrettes as a place where you come, you sit through a meeting, you say what you want, it gets written on a wall, and you come back 3 days later, and then it's not at all what you thought you heard people say. Our charrettes are different because what we do is we tell people, please come to the charrette. While we have studied your zoning code extensively and we think we have a good understanding of it, we don't know the communities the way you all know the communities. So we want you to come in and work with us and sit down with us and help us sculpt the kinds of buildings you want to see. And that's where Max is going to be very effective. We always tell people that typically as a means of communication, there are 3 ways people communicate: through the language of words, through the language of numbers, but we tend to forget the language of drawing. And our charrettes are going to be about conveying drawings, even if it's technical, because it really is a persuasive tool to help people understand what happens within their communities. Numbers can have a whole host of, 10% open space. Well, what does that mean? What does that look like? It's very hard to understand. Once you start to speak about the character of a place, which is what these urban design guidelines are going to try to incorporate and encapsulate, then it's very different. We can draw what that looks like. So that's what this is going to help us do. But it has to be rooted in the underlying zoning that is permitted within the property. So very quickly, the context of the area is such that there are 3 CRA areas: the urban core, the east side, and the west side, that collectively constitute about 10% of the size of the city. You can see here, there they are. They're adjacent to downtown and in relationship to the rest of the city. And here they are. From one end, from the center to the edge, basically encapsulates all of them. Zooming in tighter, you can see where the boundaries are. For example, here's Cervantes right here. You all know it well. Now, there's a lighter blue area, which are called special review districts. These are your historic and preservation districts for the most part, or your special districts like your waterfront or gateway, in which there already are some very detailed regulations and guidelines attached to them. Those areas we're not touching because they have their own process. We've been told they work quite well, and so we're staying away from them. We're going to be focused on the areas outside of those areas in particular. And this is a zoning map just to show you sort of how you're zoned. So it's complicated, but essentially the yellow you see are the residential areas, the pink you see are the commercial areas, and here are all the historic preservation areas. And so what can be done on the yellow areas, what uses are permitted on the yellow areas, how tall buildings can be in the yellow areas, are different to what is permitted and encouraged along the pink areas. And so that's going to serve as our starting point. Now, the CRA has some ambitious goals that people tend to think of them as contradictory, but they really needn't be. One is the preservation of neighborhood character, which is the most important, but the other one is the revitalization of neighborhoods. And so how do you allow for sensible development within your community that is not going to erode or detract from what people like in their neighborhoods? And your CRA areas have a lot of heritage attached to them. Pensacola is one of the very first cities that was founded. And there's a lot of great things about your neighborhood that cities aspire to have, including, for example, your very small grid of blocks and streets, which really is the key to having walkable, human-scaled communities, and you have that. The enhancement of property values is maintaining property values at a minimum, obviously eliminating blight, and zoning doesn't resolve all of this. Part of what we're doing is tapping into some of the goals of the CRAs. It can't solve everything, but it can help solve many things. We want to create walkable streets, and during the week we're going to talk to you about what makes a walkable street. You probably hear a lot of people talk about that, but really what is it that makes a street walkable? And we want to recognize that placemaking, creating places that people love, If you love your community, you're more likely to respect it and want to be within it and care for it. So when we talk about placemaking, we talk about making places that people remember and love. So that's what we're going to do, because it is central to the health of a community from a social, economic, and even from an actual physical health perspective. So we're going to be constantly looking to write guidelines that, on one hand, preserve the quality and the character of your neighborhood, and on the other hand, can provide guidance as to how to revitalize it. Now, what is this project not about is also important. It's not about modifying your comprehensive plan, and every city has a comprehensive plan, and a comprehensive plan is basically a way that guides a city's growth. It tells you how your city is going to grow, what your anticipated population is going to be over the next 30 years or 15 years, and where that growth should be directed. We're not touching that. That's been done, and it's been accepted. We're not also rewriting your zoning or land development regulations, so we're not changing density, we're not changing height, we're not changing that sort of stuff. We're also, as I mentioned, not modifying your special review districts because they have they function well, and we don't want to touch things that function well. We're not about imposing inappropriate architectural regulations that are going to cause undue burden on property owners. We don't want to complicate the approvals process. We want to simplify it, actually. And this is certainly not about bypassing the public process either. On the other hand, what is this project about? It's about making it easier for the community to see what is or is not possible, even desirable within your own communities, and achieving consensus on that. So we'll propose guidelines, and you'll let us know if it seems to make sense to you or not. And we're going to show you how the impact of that from a drawing standpoint, as I mentioned before. So those overlay design standards are intended to align zoning with the community goals. When we read the goals of your city, they make a lot of sense. You know, they're about creating housing choices across a wider range of building types. It's about making sure that your commercial corridors thrive. It's about making sure that you don't have uses that are incompatible next to each other. It's about making sure that your corridors accommodate other modes of transportation other than cars. So that all makes a lot of sense. But too often our zoning is not aligned to that. We also want to provide opportunity for your input and engagement throughout the process. And as I mentioned, we want to simplify the approvals process. So what are urban design guidelines? Well, it varies tremendously. So on one end of the spectrum is is your current zoning right now. And your current zoning, I think most people would agree, creates an unpredictable outcome. Why it creates an unpredictable outcome is because it specifies very few regulations that are attached to how buildings can sit on a property. So there are no form standards. And as a result, you can have incompatible buildings next to each other. The uses may not be incompatible, but the form of the buildings may be. And that's a problem, because if you have a property next to you, especially if it's not zoned for single family, you really have a wide range of options of what could be done on that property. On the other side of the spectrum, the special review districts have a whole host of regulations attached to them, for good reason, because many of them encompass some of your heritage buildings. So they tend to specify where parking can and can't go, how you have to screen surface parking lots because it's an eyesore, what the sizes of fences should be. They even limit paint colors in certain conditions. They give form regulations in terms of how buildings respond to the street. They specify which materials are permitted or not, what's an appropriate lighting, and very detailed character-defining elements such as what your doors should look like and windows and shutters and chimneys and roofs. And so that, because the rules are so much tighter, it creates a much more predictable outcome. That's also not what we're going to do here. So on one hand, you have this level 1, which is what the majority of your area yields, and on the other hand, you have here. We're coming next week to figure out what kind of guidelines we can write. Somewhere along the spectrum, that's going to be able to give you a more predictable outcome of what you can expect in your community while not burdening you with stuff that you don't need to be burdened on, such as paint colors and materials and that sort of stuff. And you will decide what that level of comfort needs to be. Now, very briefly on the project timeline, this is a 4-phase project. The first phase was us understanding the context, which we spent the past month and a half doing. We've looked at all the previous reports that have been provided to us and done an analysis of your zoning. We're coming in next week for the charrette, the planning workshop, And we want to, by the end of the week, have a structure for how we're going to provide the urban design guidelines and have a sense of what those are going to be. Phase 3 has to do with having stakeholder workshops, more city council presentations, as well as then reviewing the drafts of the urban design regulations and getting comments on that. And phase 4 is what we call the adoption process and the implementation, which is really about helping the city figure out how this gets embedded in their own zoning code and providing them with the technical support and even training sessions for the planners and the code enforcers and the building inspectors so that they can know what the new rules are, so that they can know what to enforce or not. Lastly, a very quick presentation on what is a charrette? The word charrette is actually a French word that comes from the École des Beaux-Arts in France. Is a very well-known architecture and art school that was known for producing beautiful drawings in the 18th century, and the students would spend days and months on these drawings. And when they were taken to be graded by their professors, these people would come on these carts, or what's called a charrette in French, and the students would be jumping on that to put the finishing touches on the drawings. We use that to mean an intensive planning workshop where we really work until the very last minute to get to a sort of a final product. It's very collaborative and very intensive, and it's a lot of fun. It doesn't have to be boring or dry, even though zoning is that way. But it really is an opportunity for the community to affect what they want to see in their own community. Now, we do a lot of listening on charrettes, and when you're going to see the schedule, you're going to hear us talk about, we're going to have meetings, specialized meetings on certain topics, because fundamentally, we have to give something to the city that is respectable, that is in keeping with what people have told us they want, and that meets the legal criteria of what urban design regulations are or aren't. And then we're going to design. But we don't design first and listen. We're showing up not having written one regulation. We've got an understanding of what your current situation permits or doesn't permit, but now we need to hear from you all in terms of what you want so that we can start to craft regulations that are aligned with that. And so when you see the schedule, maybe I'll go to the schedule and then I'll come back to this page, sorry. Here's the week-long or the 4-day public charrette. We're showing up on Sunday, actually, when we're going to drive through and walk the area. We've done it before, but we're going to do it again to verify what it is we've understood. But then we're going to have 4 meetings throughout the week that are focused on special topics. So if you have an interest in one of those topics, by all means come. If during those times are the only times you can come to the charrette, we try to have evening meetings, day meetings, and keep the studio open even when there aren't meetings, so that people can, during this week, have time under their own schedule to come and engage with us. And when you come in, you'll have, if you don't want to talk, you just want to listen, that's fine. If you have some very strong ideas, we'll assign a designer to you, and they will draw up your ideas, and then we'll discuss the pros and cons of them. Because it's not to say that every idea gets incorporated, but if it isn't, we'll give you the valid reasons as to why it isn't, and then it gets debated. Just because we think it's a bad idea or someone else thinks it's a bad idea, good and bad ideas have to float on their merits, up or down, once we agree on a series of principles. So we're going to have 4 meetings. On Monday, we have a zoning and urban and architectural design meeting, which is really with planning to talk about what's currently permitted or not. Meeting 2 is a stakeholder meeting, so it may be property owners, developers, concerned residents, civic associations. We're hoping that's open up to people who actually own property or people who know the property and can tell us what it is they want to see. On Tuesday, we have a transportation and public works meeting because, how our streets are designed impact directly the quality of the adjacent land uses, so that's important. And then Tuesday evening, we'll have an opening presentation in which we will summarize to you what we've heard. Here's our assessment and our analysis of the existing conditions, and here's what we've heard from people who have come to date. Here's what we think is going to be very generally sort of what we think where we're heading, and you will tell us if you think that's right or wrong. Wednesday is again an intensive studio work session for us. As you can see, the studio is open most of the day. So people, we want the studio to be open and for people to feel completely welcome to come in and talk to us. We have a meeting with the CRA and the planning board to debrief them that day. And then Thursday, we'll be prepping for a final presentation. And we close the studio as of noon there because we need to just work on getting the actual presentation done so we have something to show you. Now, to go back, fundamentally, I think we hear, and this isn't to boast about DPZ, but we hear that our charrettes are different to other places because we really engage communities in a way that they're not used to being engaged. Partly is through drawing, partly is for clarifying. So we listen and learn and teach. This is an opportunity for us to listen and learn from you. It's also an opportunity for you to learn from us because, as I mentioned before, zoning is rough and it's tough and it's complicated. And it's an opportunity for us to explain to you why things are the way they are in your zoning code. And as a result of this collaborative process in which you're hearing from us, we're responding, you react, we respond again, it results in a document that has some community support. No document is going to have 100% community support, but it can have a majority of the community support. Fundamentally, at the end of the day, we're going to make a proposition, and you all will decide through your public process if you like what's being proposed or if you don't, and you will vote it up or down with your elected officials. So that's fundamentally what it is. So we hope to see you there. We hope you can come. We're excited to come to Pensacola. You know, so often we work in cities that don't have a quarter of the heritage that you all have, and it's certainly worth preserving, and it's certainly worth having a very serious and extended discussion of what it's going to take to keep that character intact, while allowing for development to happen and for your neighborhoods to thrive. So I'm sorry, I probably took a little more than 15 minutes, but I now want to open up to Q&A.
And as we do open to the question and answer, again, I would like to remind any appointed or elected officials that this is a sunshine meeting. And so the city attorney has asked that you please be aware that as an elected or an appointed member of a city board or council, you are under an obligation to refrain from making any comments regarding your position on any issues that you are likely to have to vote on in the future. And this will be coming. We love sunshine in Florida. We have probably the strictest sunshine laws in the nation, and that's for everyone's protection. Anyone else, please feel free to make a comment or ask a question.
Is that for the speaker form?
Yes.
This is.
And we ask you to please go to the podium so that your comments or questions will be recorded into the
Yeah.
record.
We're going to take them as we
Oh, I
receive them, so
okay.
I'll announce and then,
Thank you.
and then if you'll come up. Thank you.
She's number one anyway. Oh, no.
Okay, first up, we have Mr. Amir Filati with Parsco LLC.
Good afternoon, Amir Filati at 700 North De Villers, and I am a member of an appointed board, so I was just going to ask some questions. The city attorney said I could ask questions, but not make comments or opinions. So, if that's still correct.
We have the assistant city attorney here. Is that correct? Okay.
So, my first question is, what is our projected timeline that this new overlay district will hopefully go into effect? And from a construction and development point of view, how does that affect any projects that may already be in the process of being developed, or even if they're submitted for permit? If the permit's issued, I'm assuming this wouldn't affect that.
That is correct. I mean, the attorney can confirm that, but projects that are already vested would not have to in any way comply with Urban Design Guidelines. That's typical anywhere. I mean, zoning codes are constantly refined and amended, but those amendments are always, and not that we're amending a zoning code, but just to show that codes are living, breathing documents, and they get amended all the time. But projects are only tied to those regulations or guidelines that were in place when the project was approved. So that's a long way of saying yes, the projects would be vested. And I'm sorry I skipped through the timeline, but here it is. The phase one was this month and last month. Phase 2 is being done in February and March, which is our charrette in February, and it's our intention to submit a preliminary draft guidelines by mid-March to the CRA. Then Phase 3 is what we call the public process. It's going to go through CRA and planning board workshops and city council workshops and hearings, which are all public. And then in May, hopefully, it goes to city council for reading. And then in June, we go through, or after May and June, we go through training sessions with the planning staff to help them do whatever they need to get this implemented, and to help the planners and everybody else who reviews these, and the code reviewers, understand the implications of what it is they'll be looking at.
Okay, thank you.
Does that answer the question?
Yes, yes. Now, with the assistant attorney's response, we'll also open it up to Ms. Aretta Anderson. She had signed up first.
She was just giving that.
Okay,
She had a question.
she doesn't have any questions at this time. Okay, next up, we have Dr. Gloria Horning with the Tan Yard Neighborhood Association, resident.
How are you? When you come here next week, I highly suggest you bring some rubber boots, because in the Tan Yard area and on Garden, if we just have a little rain, it floods up to above your ankles. And that's one of the questions that we must address, is the infrastructure that is surrounding all of our communities. It floods with a 10-minute rain. Second of all, in the Tan Yard community, which I'm speaking of as the vice president, we have several habitat homes. And we don't want to see those folks being run out because they don't fit the standards of these new homes. Also, we have a hellacious parking issue. We have an elderly community. More young people are coming in. But, biking is fine, but when you're a mother with 2 children, you need to get to work, you're not going to be riding a bike. I look forward to some type of alternative to our big buses, but we have to keep our bus system alive and well. I see the copy of the timeline, and I was wondering if we could get an actual copy of that so we can see it a little better. And the last part is, we do have building going on nonstop in the Tan Yard. It's dirty, it's dusty, they're loud, there's storm runoff. How are we going to maintain this huge building boom? Thank you.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last one. How are you going to maintain?
Already in the Tan Yard community and also in Belmont de Villiers, but I'm not a part of that community per se. We've got a lot of building going on, and the code violations are daily. So it's impacting the people that already live there. So how are we going to make sure, when all of this starts taking place, that we're not going to have the same issues that we're having now with the massive built out? Thank you.
Okay, so some of your, so they're all good questions. Some of them are a little bit beyond the scope of this project. But so, for example, the code violations that are happening daily now, that's a code enforcement issue. You know, whether you have, and every city, and Pensacola is no different, has standards under which construction sites have to be maintained, and soil erosion has to be contained. And so that's up to the building inspectors to ensure that that's happening. That's not, nothing that we're going to write or not write is going to affect that one way or another. Proposing urban design guidelines is not going to either accelerate or deter construction from continuing. We don't anticipate that what we're going to do in any way is going to change the pattern under which development is or isn't happening. What it could do is if we were to write, which we're not going to do, very stringent guidelines, nobody would build. But that's not what people want to hear, and that's not what we're intending to do. So this isn't going to change the amount of development that happens. What it will do, hopefully, is make the development a little more contextual and in keeping with the character of your neighborhood. Now, we're not also looking to, just because some housing currently doesn't fit, doesn't mean they want to be, nothing is going to be done that's going to run people out of the neighborhood. That's not the intention at all. But I'll have to go look at the habitat housing to see why people think it fits or doesn't fit. If you can leave Victoria with the address of that particular project you refer to, it'd be interesting to go see it. Just for our understanding, is when people refer to a building that they either really like or really dislike, we want to know where it is. So she'll communicate that address to us, and we'll take a look at it. But the intention is really to urban design guidelines are not written to displace people in any manner. Your other reference was on yes, not everybody's going to bike, not everybody's going to walk. Some people are going to continue driving, and that's going to be the case. Your local streets, for the most part, are perfectly fine, even though there's an entire section up on the east side that doesn't have sidewalks. So we want to, we know what kind of rules it takes to, or guidelines it takes to encourage walking and biking, but you want to give it to people as an option. You don't want to mandate it or require it. And we're certainly not about taking transit routes away in any way. I think you would hear Rick Hall, the transportation consultant, tell you that any transportation, we want the transportation and the transit to be as robust as possible. So there's not going to be any recommendation to that in terms of that. And then your very first question, which had to do with bringing our rubber boots because of flooding, we are going to look at your landscaping and your storm water guidelines or regulations to see what it is about those areas, what it is about those, and see if they can be supplemented in any way. The areas that you say flood, it could be because there's an issue, a drain not draining properly, or the land isn't, whatever. There's a whole host of reasons why it floods. And urban design guidelines are not necessarily intended to address flooding, but we will discuss that with the city, because we have heard that stormwater management is, in every city we go now, is becoming crucial. So that will be part of our overall review. Thank you.
Also, I'm just going to make a comment in regards to the timeline. We do have in the back both the timeline for the charrette as well as the full timeline of public input and the adoption meeting. The whole schedule is in the back.
And Victoria, we will make this presentation available to you as a PDF so that people can download it right after this is over.
I've just been told
And
that.
it's also recording, so we'll make the recording available too.
I've just been told that we're out of the printed out versions, but for anyone that provided an email, I can forward a copy of that. And it's also posted on the website, which is www.cityofpensacola.com/CRA overlay. So you can find it there as well.
Marina, this is Helen, and I just would like to recap your response to Mr. Amir as it relates to Ms. Horning's question and issue. And that is with regard to existing properties, buildings, permitted projects. There will be no requirement from this to go back and retrofit anything that is already in place. It will apply from this point forward.
That's correct. That's our understanding too.
Okay, our next speaker we have is Miss Marilyn Wiggins with Tanyard.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. I am the president of the Tanyard Neighborhood Association. And I do have a lot of concerns, and I can't tell you about all of them today. But one of my main concerns is about all the houses that has been going up in our area, which we have joy for that, but there are so many things that is going on. Like, for instance, putting all these houses up, and I'm just wondering where these people's going to park right now, because, building all these houses and nowhere to park and having to park on the streets, that can be a little dangerous. Because the simple fact is, I sit on my porch on Intensive Street every day and watch as the traffic come off of Government Street, turn on car, and run straight through the stop sign, never stop. Just go right on about their business, you know what I'm saying? And that's very dangerous for our children. We sit there and watch how they come through our area speeding doing 60, sometimes 65, and I go like, wow, is this really, these people are really crazy? Because we have kids go to school, and there's the buses come in that area, which is a residential area. The speed limit should not be but 25 in that area, because I am a retired bus driver also. So, it make me a little angry, and I holler and scream at them, but they keep on going, don't pay you no attention. But some of the things I really wanted to say was a lot of things that Dr. Harney spoke about. The flooding is still in our area. We have a $3 million park, new park, the Corey Jones Recreation Park, and we're still getting flooded in that area, which is really sad. That's a lot of money involved to pay for a park. And every time we look around, they back out there digging up stuff, and I keep wondering what is going on, with this park. But concerning about the Habitat houses, which is located right next door to me, and all the people are concerned, we're having big houses put down, and that's okay. People have a right to move where they want and build their homes where they want to. But even in the process of them coming in our area, you have no right to try to push nobody else out of that area because of what you want, okay? Because this is a little wrong, because those people has retired and paid for their homes, and they may not look like that $500,000 house across the street from me, but it is their house, and they want to stay there, and they don't feel like nobody have a right to come doing nothing else but trying to help them better their condition. And I've been told about some CRA money, how it's supposed to help people, better their condition. But, seems like the plan is a little off base, because if you got $6,500 in the bank, you don't need the CRA money. Possibly you could fix your own house. But they offer them this type of money, and they don't have it, and telling them, well, we'll give it back to you. But like I said, if somebody has some money, possibility they'll fix their own property up. And because they can't fix it, they don't need to be moving out of their homes, okay? So we need to come up with another solution to help the poor peoples, because everybody don't have a lot of money. Thank you so much.
Marina, I would just like to take this opportunity, this is Helen, and I'd just like to take this opportunity to address Miss Marilyn's concern about the CRA program. And I wholly agree with everything she said in regard to that, and which is why we have developed a program. The program we have developed is not in the way that you described it. It is not a reimbursement program. The monies are provided up front by the CRA. It is not a matching program. There are some that are opposed to the way we're doing it, but for the very reasons that you just stated, the CRA board has approved it in this manner, so that people who otherwise would not have the means to fix up their homes so that they can stay there will be able to do that. Welcome. We will.
Helen, I would just like to add to your comments very briefly to say that the previous speaker just spoke about parking overwhelming streets, and that's a perfect example of what we are going to look at, because just to make sure that single-family houses provide parking on their lot, because that's what the code requires. Now, if it's not happening, it'd be good to understand why. And then the other issue had to do with speeding on streets, and we've heard that loud and clear too. That in fact, we've heard from the fire chief that speeding is one of their biggest concerns. Oh, I've heard this secondhand, that the fire chief has said that speeding is a concern, especially on some of the main thoroughfares. And so we are going to be looking at what is feasible and doable for DOT to traffic calm some of those streets.
Yeah, Marina, this is Rick. Can you hear me?
Yes?
for everybody in the meeting, I am the traffic engineer that will be attending next week. And I own 2 speed guns myself. And when I was over in Pensacola a week or so ago, I did have my speed gun, and I measured traffic on Main Street near the old part of town, near Palafox, and the speeds were fairly good there. But then I drove out to Old Garden Street out on the west side, and the posted speed was 30, I believe, and 30 or 35, and the cars were going 45, and some cars were going 50, and so I will have my speed gun with me, and if anybody has particular concerns about locations that you would like me to check, I will do that for you.
Thank you, Rick.
Okay, our next speaker is James Goalie with the Westside Redevelopment Board.
And Mr. Gully, I just want to remind you that based on what the city attorney has said, you would only be limited to questions.
Hi, I'm James Goalie with the Westside CRA, and I would just like to tell you that I am in the neighborhoods every day. That includes all 3 areas, urban core, west side, and east side. And I would like to very definitely state that at this point in time, I do not have an opinion on these issues, but here are the issues I am concerned about. Side parking and rear parking. A lot of the new developments are going in on 30-foot lots, and I believe most of them are going with front parking. Is this something that you could take a look at?
Yes.
Okay. Second issue, and again, I'd like to state that at this time I have no opinion on this issue, but it's garages. Maybe some guidelines. Could you have some guidelines about front-facing garages as well as either side or rear garages?
Yes, James, you are referring exactly to the kinds of things that the Urban Design Guidelines are going to be looking at.
Thank you. A third.
Proposing.
Okay. A third thing, and again, I have no opinion on this at this time, but it's front facade of houses and primary entry door, street facing, porch, and or stoop. Is this something that you would be looking for or looking at in your building design?
Yes, we will.
And I do have addresses of
But we would like to hear more.
Okay.
So we would like to hear more from the community, in particular all the 3 things you raised, whether it's side rear parking, location of garages, all street-facing entries and stoops.
Okay.
What it is that they feel they like, dislike, and would like to see improved.
Okay.
We have ideas too, but
Right.
we need it confirmed by the community.
I appreciate your response to that. And like I say, there are exceptions about front facades, and I do have addresses. I look forward to seeing you when you get here to Pensacola. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, our next speaker is Bill Weeks, as a resident of the CRA.
I just had 2 quick comments. On the very first map that just showed up, it showed the CRA boundaries. I've lived in the dark blue section on the right-hand side where the word urban core is at for 37 years. I've lived in that same house. I did a quick drive through the neighborhood this past weekend, and there's approximately 330 parcels there. 12 of those have not been built on. So when we're adopting guidelines for the entire CRA, are they going to be all-inclusive, meaning that one size fits all, or are we kind of spinning our wheels when we're talking about 12 vacant properties out of 330?
That's a good question, along with the others we've heard. The reality is we don't know yet if it's going to be a one-size-fits-all series of guidelines for the urban core, east side or west side, or if they're going to be further tailored to the specific conditions we observe in all of them. So we don't have a definitive thought on that yet. We're thinking that there may be sort of guidelines that are appropriate to all three, and then maybe certain guidelines that are more appropriate to one area versus another. The same way your special review districts sort of currently work right now. Now, in relationship to the vacant parcels, again, the guidelines are not intended to incentivize redevelopment in any way. Hopefully, it will simplify it for folks who want to develop and give them a clarity of vision under which they can develop. That may help, but it's not going to. It won't resolve the vacancy or the vacant parcel problems. It's not going to require the people with vacant parcels, for example, redevelop.
Well, it's the fact that the parcels are vacant is only because the people have chosen not to sell them at this point, waiting on the price to go up. But a standard 40-foot wide lot in that area is selling for $120,000 now. So, I mean, the incentive to build is certainly there. It's just the fact that people are not ready to sell the lots. They're not for sale. So,
well,
I don't know about the development.
So that's an interesting. So what you're suggesting, or maybe not suggesting, but the possible implications in this is that there may be land speculation going on, and often that is the case when the zoning is sort of open to when there's a lot of things that are permissible under the current zoning. And then not that we're looking to change the zoning, but if we impose additional urban design guidelines, then it becomes apparent to property owners that what should go there is in keeping with what's around there. It may reduce the level of speculation that goes on. It may. Who knows? We'll see.
Okay. And one other quick comment. At the very beginning, you talked about the massing of buildings and a maximum size and things like that. I'd also ask that you consider minimum sizes for buildings, because and I'll share this more with you next week. I'm seeing a lot of plans come into my office that they're trying to make houses as small as they possibly can, and to me that does more damage than a large house next door to you as far as land values.
And Marina, just so that you'll know, Bill does kind of wear two hats today. He is also the chief building inspector for the City of Pensacola, as well as a property owner in the district.
Got it.
Okay, our next speaker is Shayla Kaplan, a Westside resident and owner.
Hello, I'm Sheila Kaplan. I'm new to Pensacola. I've been here about 2 years, and I renovated a cute little bungalow on West Larua between L and M Street. And I'm really interested in encouraging encouraging infill in that neighborhood, and also trying to encourage landlords who own some of the less pretty housing in the neighborhood to perhaps take better care of the housing. I'd like to also see what we can do to encourage other people to renovate the property. It would have been great if I'd had some financial help, because I sunk a lot of money into that little house. Sidewalks, neighborhood would be great. People walk in the streets. Also, there are empty churches in the neighborhood, and some of them are in quite bad disrepair. I'm wondering what we can do about that sort of thing. And what can I do to help? I have never done anything like this before.
Thank you, Sheila. Come to our charrette and sit with us and help us identify these issues more precisely would be a great way to begin. Some of the things you mentioned are not uncommon in areas that are experiencing revitalization. Encouraging renovation, we'll have to flush that out a little bit in terms of what that means exactly. It'd be good to talk to Bill too, since he's the chief building inspector, to try understand from him a little better what are the renovation blocks currently. It could be, as one of the speakers initially said, it could be a lack of funding, a lack of available resources. There may be, sometimes it's about making people aware of what the resources are. I don't know if in the current zoning there are how stringent the requirements are for, renovations is one thing. Bringing buildings up to, if buildings are declared unsafe, it's a whole other. So, and there's a range. So the urban design guidelines may not address it to that. I think I'll have to look at the zoning code to see what the zoning code requires. In terms of empty churches and sidewalks, also these are all. We've heard that there are empty churches. We've heard that some are converting into other uses, and we're certainly going to encourage that sidewalks be provided where they currently don't exist. But it'll take time. But maybe identifying priority areas can be part of this process. Thank you.
Okay, our next speaker is Andrew Rothfeder, President of Studer Properties.
Good afternoon. First, I just wanted to say that I absolutely applaud this effort, and I appreciate all the people that have come together to make this happen. I think that one of the things that I understand the goal of this process is to improve the quality of life. So whatever that ends up looking like out of this process, I think that's the goal. You mentioned, ma'am, on the phone, I'm sorry I got here late and I didn't hear your name, but that Marina, the process isn't about disincentivizing or incentivizing development, but I certainly think one of the goals is not to disincentivize development either. Neither of those is the goal. It's about improving the quality of life, making our city better, more walkable, more attractive. So I think those are great goals, and I appreciate, by the number of people that are in here, tells me that this community is engaged and wants to be a part of this process. One thing I would say, and Councilman Wu, I see you and I so appreciate your being here and part of this process. My understanding, and this would be my first question, is that ultimately whatever comes out of this group, City Council has to approve this plan. Would that be correct? And it would just be a hope and a thought that in addition to Councilman Wu, we would see significant City Council person involvement in this project throughout it, so that when it gets to that point, the votes are basically a foregone conclusion. That would be really nice to see, so that we don't go through this entire effort without the engaged involvement of the all city council members, so that when we get to the final piece, we know what the vote's going to be before it happens. One question I had, and maybe it's in the form of a suggestion, having been through a lot of processes like this, there's a few of us in here, me less so than, say, a Christian Wagley or a Brian Spencer, who are students of this process. And again, I am not where they are. I'm less of a student, who have full understanding of what this process is and what it's trying to get to. But most of us in here don't have a clue. We haven't been through this before. We don't understand it. And I think this is a repeatable error that we see. I can see it in my own organization, I assure you, is that we go through processes like this as if we are the first people that have ever done it. And that is absolutely not the case here. We have a lot of benchmarking we can do about communities that have been through this process, gotten to the end, implemented things, and I guarantee you a lot of things have been done right and a lot of things have not. How can this group take advantage of those learnings early in the process before we get started? So my suggestion is it Marina? Yeah. If it's possible early on in the process that a presentation be developed for this group to show examples of where this has worked, where it has not, the pieces that worked, what got implemented, mistakes that were made, so that we are not, yet again, a beta testing ground for mistakes that have already been made in other places that we can learn from. This is about learning. I look forward to learning in this process. I don't know what it's going to end up as, but we have examples that we can use of things that went right and things that didn't go right. And if we could have the advantage of that information before we get started, to me, personally, it would be extremely helpful. So that's a request. Thank you.
That's a good question. I can tell you that, so DPZ and many, many other firms have written, have done everything from rewriting zoning codes from scratch and throwing out the old code to doing things at a much lighter level and just writing urban design regulations that overlay over existing zoning, which is what this effort's intended to be. We will provide you with lists of cities that have done that. But fundamentally, what it really boils down to is, the level of regulation, we always tell folks it's easy to write regulations. When a community is clear about what their vision is or what their understanding of improving the quality of their life, as you put it, then it's not hard to write the rules that could incentivize that or get you there. But really, the adoption of fundamentally what ends up getting adopted boils down to where is that political will to accept those changes? Will the community support that level of change? Will the planners administer it well? And will it be enforced? Because you can write, we see this in other places, not in America, but in other places in which we work, where they write the most beautiful rules and regulations, but they never get enforced. And so it becomes useless. And so everywhere we go, one of the very first things we say is, are you willing to enforce this regulation? And if the answer is yes, and if there's support for it, then it goes into the urban design regulations. If there's no willingness to support it politically, or if there's no willingness to enforce it, or it's too difficult or subjective, then it doesn't help to put it in. So, while I understand your question about benchmarking, the places that, in some respects, a city like Charleston, we just finished working in Charleston, where the mayor went to us and said, our heritage are our buildings, and we don't like the new construction that's coming in. It's not reflective of what Charleston used to be. Give us guidelines that are going to help us get there, and it's very difficult from an architectural standpoint. Even the special review districts that have incredibly prescriptive rules down to the pattern on the doors, that still doesn't yield necessarily good results, because fundamentally it boils down to how good is your architect, or how committed is your builder to building it properly. So this is a long-winded way of saying that the level of urban design regulations are directly related to the commitment on behalf of the administration to want to adopt them and enforce them, and the community's willingness to support them. But it's also an understanding that it'll only get you so far. These guidelines are not going to resolve everything. Fundamentally, you want good builders, you want good architects, and you want people that understand what Pensacola is about and are able to give architecture that is reflective of the character that you have there. And it's not a stylistic issue. It's more of a, are you using materials that are local? Is it of the place in terms of its climate, its region, and its heritage? Does that make sense? It's a long-winded way of saying it's a complicated question you ask, but we can at least, at a minimum, we can provide you with a list of cities that have adopted codes at all ranges of and regulations at all scales.
Thank you. I think my question is, in addition to just telling us which cities have done it, can we get the learnings? What has happened as a result of a city that did it 2 years ago, 4 years ago, 6 years ago? What was working? What's not working? Actual results.
Well, so that requires speaks. We could tell you about the places we've worked in, but we can't tell you about the places we haven't worked in. That'll go well. We can't get that to you by next week. And but at a minimum, we can at least tell you a little bit about the places where we have worked.
Okay, our next speaker is Barbara Mayall, a citizen of the city.
Hi, Maria. Correct me if I didn't understand you correctly. I thought I heard you say that there would be no retrofit. What about the ADA guidelines when you come into a neighborhood
and we have to redo some homes. The ADA guidelines, would they be included?
Well, so the answer to that is every code, and yours is no different, has a trigger for when a building hits what they call a substantial modification, or when a retrofit of a building is over, let's say, more than 50% of the structure or over X amount of dollars, then it has to be brought up to code. And that includes bringing it up to ADA standards. Now, that doesn't apply to most single-family homes, but it does apply to structures that are bigger than that. And so someone who wants to do a little addition to their home, of course, is not going to have to comply with ADA. But someone who's doing a renovation of a commercial building does have to. What we're going to propose is not in any way going to change what your current code right now, what the triggers are in your current code right now about when you have to bring it up to new life safety and new ADA requirements.
Okay, and I just...
Marina, this is Rick. From a transportation standpoint, when the streets are modified, they must adhere to ADA standards for sidewalk ramps and sidewalk slope and width to allow wheelchairs on the sidewalks. So any transportation modification to the intersections or the streets will be ADA compliant by law.
Okay, thank you. And I just wanted to make a statement. I agree with Andrew about the group of people that gave up their time and part of the main part of the day to come here, and that just shows that we are engaged in our community. This room is almost full, and it's exciting to me to see everyone here wanting to make our community better. And no one is here trying to bring negativity to the room. We're all here trying to bring a positive outcome. So with that, I think the unknown of something, it brings fear to a person. But once you explain something to us, like you've did today and did the Pre-Charrette, I think people will go into next week thinking a lot more positive, because, like I said, you're scared of what you don't know. And when people explain things to you, I think it's a little more comfortable feeling. And I just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you. You raise a very good point. Well, first, thank you. Our feeling is that so far it's been also you've asked very good questions, and it seems very positive. That's not to say that we understand why people come in angry and scared, because change is uncomfortable, and more often than not, when an area redevelops, it loses its character, and the new development that comes in is of a worse quality than what used to be there. So, but it doesn't need to be. And that's the whole purpose of what these urban design guidelines are intended to be, is to show you that new development, can be a welcome thing if it contributes to the quality of the life on the streets and to the quality of the life on that block. Then it can be viewed as in a positive way. And that's really what we're trying to do. And so it's wonderful. It's always wonderful to have people come to charrettes that are positive and can contribute. It's also important, so we would ask you all in the room to reach out to your neighbors, to your friends, to your colleagues, to your civic leaders, and tell them to come, and tell them to bring those that are skeptical, and tell them to bring those that are upset, because we really are coming with an open mind and of course, as planners, we have ideas. As a couple of speakers ago talked about benchmarking, we know what has worked in other cities, and we know what doesn't work, but we don't know if it's too much of a burden or too little of a burden on Pensacola. So that will get played out through your entire public process. It will start at the charrette, but it certainly won't end there. Because we're going to make a bunch of proposals, and then you all will say yes to this one, no to that one, and it'll get, worked and reworked. But it's important to hear from those who are unhappy, because part of being afraid of change doesn't mean that sometimes people are afraid of change, and so they vote no to anything. But what people often fail to realize is that when you turn something down, especially when it relates to zoning and urban design guidelines, the status quo continues. So development, if you were to vote no, if we were to make a series of propositions for the urban design guidelines that people just decide, no, we don't want that, that means that development continues along the path it has continued, and with all the good and the bad that comes along with that. So if people were generally satisfied with what's happening, then this exercise wouldn't really be necessary. But what we have heard is that it can be better. So how much better can it be is what we're trying to do, and that's what we're trying to arrive at next week. So that's why it's important to also hear from those that are naysayers, so that we can explain to them the implications of doing nothing. Because it's really important to understand that. Doing nothing doesn't mean doing nothing. Doing nothing means development continues along its current pace. And that's an important distinction. Thank you.
Thank you, Marina. We have two more speakers in the room at this time. Our next speaker is Will Dunaway with Clark Partington.
Hey, Marina, I just wanted to clarify and see that my understanding is that area in the light blue is not going to be studied. And I wanted to ask specifically, is that because of existing plans, specifically the 2010 CRA redevelopment plan? And if that's the case, are we, do we as a community believe that's the plan that we ought to be following? Because that would help inform how we're moving forward.
Yes, that's a good question. So I think, and Helen and Victoria, correct me if I'm wrong, but our understanding is that we will not touch the special review districts that are indicated in light blue here, specifically because there already is an architectural review board. First, the guidelines have been put in place because there's a lot of historic structures here. We've looked at the 2010 master plan for the area, and they've recommended a whole host of issues, and the regulations are already very prescriptive. So, and we've heard it works well. We don't, and it's not our intention either to say that properties on the east side or west side have to go through an architectural review board. That's not the intention. The reason to write the urban design guidelines is to find a way to create a slightly more predictable build form that will make people more comfortable. So we will be looking at all those areas outside of the special review districts. But it's not to say we're not informed by, we did take a look at what those regulations are, because it gives us a sense of, what's feasible and what's not feasible. We're certainly not going to go and write regulations that are more prescriptive than what you have in your special review districts. So it just gives us a benchmark, on what we see, what your zoning code allows on one end of the spectrum, and we see what your special review districts allow on the other end of the spectrum. And that's why I showed this drawing, because we're going to land somewhere in between. Maybe much closer to level 1 than level 10. The west side may want to get us to a level 5, the east side may want to a level 3, the urban core may want a level 8, or vice versa. We just don't know. So how detailed those urban design regulations are going to be will get worked out through this process.
Marina, if I may, and Will, I think I can clarify a little bit. The areas that were in the light blue that were on the map already have very specific development guidelines and rules. There are multiple districts in that area, and they have to go through special review, the ARB. The dark red, if I'm correct, the dark blue is the area that does not have any type of regulation of design.
And if I could, a follow-up from Marina, and that is, would you characterize that area in the light blue as a 10, or what number would you give it? And are we satisfied as a community that in the light blue is what we want to continue? That is, are we trying to get closer to that, or are we trying to get further away from that? Because there is a question as to whether or not we are what that is, and whether we are, in fact, even following that.
Yeah, so that's a very good question. When I say level 10, I don't mean as in 10 is the best and one is the worst. I mean in terms of one yielding a very unpredictable outcome and the other one trying to yield a much more predictable outcome. Having said that, the regulations within your own special review districts vary tremendously. So the regulations in the historic and preservation areas, which are generally, in this area right here, and these areas up here, have a much greater degree of regulations than, for example, your gateway district or your waterfront district, which are actually rather light in terms of their regulations. So within your special review districts, there's no real consistency, and that's not a good or a bad thing. But it's not a one size fits all under these. But because they go through the ARB, and because they have their own review process, we're not really going to be looking at those at this stage.
Okay, our next speaker is Dottie Dubuisson, Truth for Youth and Belmont de Villiers Neighborhood Association.
And this is our last speaker.
I'd also like to echo the earlier speakers who thanked this process and the opportunity for all of us to come together, because I believe strongly that building communities start with the community building itself in a central focus. So hopefully we can get this done. The question that I have that I'd like for you to consider in this process is that the Belmont de Villiers Neighborhood Association several years ago spent about a year and a half having regular meetings with the planning staff and public meetings to rewrite some of our zoning to try to preserve the historical neighborly feeling that we had. And we've had some mixed results. We've had exceptional development kick into activity as a result, because titles and setback issues and lot size deviations that needed to be taken care of were discussed, and the community became educated. And we also had some special zonings that we created to accommodate those smaller lot sizes that kind of brought things into a more buildable standard. At the same time, we had building development groups who came in and took advantage of large blocks of property that had been land banked, and rather than creating developments to go in them, they did one-by-one house build-outs so that they were not required to do stormwater and major review before boards that maybe would have given them some advice, and we could have come up with a better result. As a result, we now have a lot of concrete abutting our walkable sidewalks, which used to be a very walkable area that now you have to watch for cars coming in and out. And my question is this: since we seem to be having somewhat of a community developmental fatigue factor in that neighborhood, having spoken out since 1997 trying to get this overlay in place, and we do have the copy from then that we will bring forward, what can we do in the short term to try to address this explosion that is happening in our neighborhood while all of this other happens? And will you be undoing all that we brought into consensus? When you talked about citywide overlays, I think that we created a very unique factor because we are a very unique neighborhood, and I'm sure everybody else feels that their neighborhood is very unique also. But we're just very concerned that we don't undo the progress that we've made, and that we move forward on the plan and the progress that we had hoped to accomplish, but we're told, hold off, we're going to do it in conjunction with others. So it's been a couple of years and our architectural overlay is not in place, even though we are a historical district and would have at one point qualified to be a historical designated preservation neighborhood. So if you'll just bear that in mind, we'll try to get as many people there and
Sure.
present, but the time of notification about this has been a bit brief, so trying to get some of the out of town and the less than able to take off during the day people here will, maybe mean a minimal presence as opposed to the large presence we had in our earlier deliberations.
No, thank you. For first, our intention is not at all to undo what has been achieved through consensus. And as you describe it, it seems that you put a lot of thought into what you wanted to see. So it would be very interesting to review those guidelines. If they're not, I don't remember seeing them, but we're still reviewing stuff. So, but if you could make sure that you provide them to Victoria and Helen by Monday, it would be very helpful. Now, how you can help is you have a history now, an understanding of how those guidelines have helped you and how property owners have taken advantage of it. And so it may be that certain thresholds have to be established under which to try to prevent those the circumventing the rules if it's possible at all. So it'd be very helpful to have you sit with us and help us understand what, once we've looked at the code, what is it that was able to happen despite the regulations that you had there? Because we can learn from that, and we can tighten rules where they need to be, or we can rather work around it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Marina, we're not seeing anyone on the chat on our end. Do you have anybody on the chat who wishes to speak?
No, we don't.
Okay.
But maybe we could ask if someone wants. Is anybody on the chat that wants to speak? I guess not.
All right, well, I would like to just respond a little bit to some of the things that Dottie has said regarding Belmont de Villiers. And with regard to the initial design guidelines that you guys have, are you referring to the front porch, the ones that were developed during French porch? Okay.
We had Belmont de Villiers Redevelopment Association, which preceded the Neighborhood Association, and that was what we kind of discussed during all that. So
Okay.
it appears to be what everyone keeps trying to move forward.
Okay. Well, we definitely would like to have those introduced into this process if they can be provided. Yeah, the guidelines, that's what we would need. Okay, great. Thank you.
Are those guidelines actually embedded in your zoning, or or what?
No, they're not.
So how do you require property owners to build under them?
They don't. They're not required at all. The neighborhood association was simply working towards getting something required.
They were proposed, and it was left that they would be moved forward through the Architectural Review Board and turned into a code. And every time that we've kind of gotten into an action spot, the city has been at a point of reviewing, and so it's been, put off, and we'll do it. First, it was going to be a form-based code, so it was pointless to do it. Then that was defeated, and then it was back around, and then we're going to do this whole CRA overlay. So my question is, we want to see some progress in terms of the preservation side. We made some progress in terms of the land use, but the actual architectural overlay, which was what we were trying to get into place, never has occurred. So that's what we'd like to see, move forward. And I just want to make sure that would be a part of this.
Like the opportunity to get there, since you're in the study area now.
I didn't hear. I'm sorry, I did not understand.
She didn't hear you, Marina.
I said this is the opportunity to now, since they are in the study area, the Belmont area, this is their opportunity to make sure that they're what they sort of have achieved consensus on, it makes it into the urban design guidelines for their neighborhoods. When I spoke earlier about certain areas may have different levels of regulations than others, that this may be an example where if the community has come together and decided that they want, for example, some architectural guidelines in here, but for example, the Westside doesn't, well, then they get written in differently.
So will there be an action plan developed during this process, or just goals again?
No, the intention is to actually write the design guidelines.
Okay, thank you.
So we would really want to see, as soon as possible, what it is that you all came to a consensus on.
Now, Ms. Dubuisson, I would like to just clarify on that. They will provide a draft set of the guidelines, and then that will go to 2 public workshops for public comment.
And also, following that, it will go to, and this is helpful, a good time to talk about the remaining schedule. Once the workshops are held, it will then be considered, they will go to the CRA and the Planning Board for consideration and action. The Planning Board will be holding a hearing. They will make a recommendation, and the CRA will make a recommendation to City Council. It will then go to City Council for 2 public hearings. And there will be an ordinance proposed, and that will have to be considered by City Council on 2 readings. There will be 2 readings of that ordinance before they can, so this entire process will go through June.
Okay, and I think that's all the comments we had at this time. Was there anyone else that wished to speak? Sir, okay. Sir, could I get you just to fill out a card so I can introduce you?
Well, I'm not even supposed to belong here, that's why I just, because I come here by accident, because the CRA means cession. But I just find out earlier that I'm supposed to be with the county. So that's why,
Okay.
that's why I don't want to further discuss, because I don't have no right to discuss my problem, because I'm in the wrong agenda. But anyway, I'm just concerned about the sewage. This, okay, my residents or my community has the old houses where they get the septic tank.
Yes.
Okay, which is, I think, in Wellington or, okay.
Yes.
My problem is, can I switch to the sewage if most of those houses were septic tank?
Yes.
What's the point?
I believe so that you can, however, I can't answer definitively. What your question is, going from septic to sewage. And so I would definitely contact the county on that. And I would contact ECUA. Okay, somebody's going to give you some tips. We thank everyone. Oh, we have one more comment coming from Gloria Horning.
I hope you understand that the biggest issue that we have in our minority and disenfranchised communities, that we will not have gentrification. We will not push out the long-term residents there at all. This will not be Pittsburgh.
And I would like to, and I know you're going to say something about that, Marina, because you mentioned it about 3 times, but I want to also state, if you guys could just give us 5 more minutes, we'll be out of here. Just want to state that this process does not have any true relation to the gentrification or the development that is happening. It will not, as Marina has said, it will not change that. It will not stop it. It will not increase it. It may make it better, and that's the whole goal. With that, we thank everyone for coming, and thank you so much, DPZ team. And we have probably had about, I would say, 50 people here.